Welcome to Authors Revealed. I'm Becky Anderson. I'm so excited. One of the books I've read recently that I absolutely adored is a debut novel by Rotert. It's called Last Night at the Blue Angel. It's about jazz, it's about love, it's about Chicago. Rebecca, welcome to Anderson's in Naperville.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, I am so happy that you're here. I am blown away. This is your debut novel. I absolutely adored this book.
I'm so glad you did. I'm so glad.
And it's funny how certain characters stay with you for a long time or remind you of the best characters of the best literature you've read. And this was one of those for me.
Oh, so, gosh, I'm so glad. Yeah. I'm so glad.
So the book has been out only, I think, 2 weeks today, literally.
Yeah,
so,
it's been only 2 weeks, yeah.
Right. So what are you hearing from readers? I know you had your big launch at home back in Nebraska, right? In Omaha.
Yeah.
So what are you hearing from everybody?
Well, I'm so surprised. For one, I'm hearing from a lot of people I haven't heard from in years, you know, people I knew from school or what have you. Yeah. People get mad at me about the book, about the sadness in the book. So there's some. I will forgive you eventually, getting some of that. But people are really loving the book, and I'm very surprised at what they're responding to. And they're writing me long things. You know, very detailed descriptions about what they loved and why they loved it, and I'm so moved by them, by those responses. It's been really lovely.
Well, and I think it's one of those books you can't just overflow about because it has everything. You know, it has love, it has heartbreak, it has frustration. You know, there's anger in there, but it's about also how we form families. You know,
yes, that's my favorite aspect of it.
This is a very different type of family.
It is very different. Yeah.
So it's got a starred review and book list, a wonderful review I read in Kirkus.
Yeah,
that was
starred
really
review Kirkus too.
So and when you get a starred review in Kirkus, man, you've made it, lady.
I think I could be wrong about that.
But I read the review and it was absolutely glowing.
Yeah,
so congratulations.
Thank you very much.
That is so
Great
cool.
Surprise.
So tell us where the spark, the germ, started to grow that gave you the idea to write, the Last Night at the Blue Angel.
Well, it was the strangest thing. I was working on a different book, and I was working 2 jobs at the time, writing early in the morning. I was driving home from work one night, and I got this paragraph in my head, and I pulled over, and I found like a receipt on the floor and scrawled it out. And it was the first paragraph, Mother was a singer, I lived in her dark margin. It was that paragraph. It just came out whole. And the next morning, I remembered it when I went to write. I wrote at a coffee shop early in the morning, and I pulled this out, and I read it, and it was clearly a child narrator, and I had never had any interest in writing a child narrator. It was just, I felt it had been done and done well, but her voice compelled me, and I followed her. I just followed her for about 20 pages, and then I kept following. So. And
what a narrator she is.
She is.
She's one of those. I mean, this narrator, this 10-year-old girl, Sophie. She stays with you forever.
Yeah.
She is such a unique person.
She really is.
She is her own person in many ways, but she's had a very interesting life just in only her 10 years. But the book, a big portion of it takes place in Chicago. So I want to know why Chicago, because music is a big influence of this book, obviously. So why Chicago?
Well, for a number of reasons. For one, it's Midwestern, and I don't feel like I have, although Chicago's not my home, I don't feel like I have the authority to write outside of the Midwest, to imagine outside of it. I don't know that I could pull it off. So it's Midwestern, but it's a Midwestern New York. You know, if you come from smaller towns, Kansas City, Omaha, where I'm from, you know, and you're an artist, or if you're somebody who seeks to recreate their life, to disappear somewhere and become someone else, you could do that in Chicago. You couldn't do it in Omaha because you're connected to everybody there, right? Or in Kansas City even, or smaller towns. So those were the 2 main reasons. There's the music was the draw, of course, but also it was a big enough place where a person could recreate their identity, which a lot of the characters in the book do once they get here.
That's so true. And what they're seeking and what they find, it can take place.
They find communities here.
So it's 1965 for a big portion of the book, but it also goes back and forth between the main character, Naomi, and her when she was growing up and what happens to her. But the nightclub in this book, the Blue Angel. And I was wondering if you had based on any of the famous nightclubs that Chicago is known for. Like there's the Blue Note that closed, which was, or some of the other ones like the Green Door or any of those, the Empty Bottle. There's some great clubs in Chicago.
Yeah. I read up on all of those clubs, and sort of took pieces here and feelings. I ended up physically sort of imagining the place because I wanted it to have its own personality, with the angel mosaic and behind the bar and the blue lamps. And it's what came to me. But yeah, I sort of drew from the feelings of a lot of those clubs, but I didn't. I created the club to be its own thing, to reflect the story as I saw it.
Right. So you must have done a lot of research. And also, the research, and I know you're a singer, you have a very big musical background, but knowing the jazz of the time, and knowing that it's 1965 and there's a lot of things changing. We're entering that time, going into it's big civil rights time, it's the Cold War, everything that's happening. And also musically things are changing.
Totally changing,
So the research, you must have done some really interesting research also of the music in the time, because I love her early life with sister helps her expose her, this great music in this book. And it was just fabulous.
Boswell sisters.
Oh my gosh, the Boswells.
I hope everybody who reads the book goes and discover the Boswell sisters, because they're just so delightful.
Yeah.
It was a lot of research. It was a lot of, I'm not an organized researcher. I came to Chicago a number of times and sort of stayed in cheap hotels and spent a lot of time at the Newberry and other libraries and reading about this and that and taking a lot of notes and talking to a lot of friends who were in music and knew a lot about jazz and sort of piecing together all these different elements, so I could have somewhat of an understanding. I don't claim a thorough understanding of the world at all, but
you captured it. It was really incredible. So this book is full of very strong women, including Sophia. I mean, she's 10 years old, but man, she has a power unto her own. But when I think about Naomi but also too sister who helped her expose her to music, made her see a different world entirely, sort of turned something on inside of her. But I'm thinking about all the other women in this book too. But there's some really incredible women. And did you base them on anybody? Any part of composites of women you know?
Absolutely.
Yourself?
They're all composites of women I've known. There's a lot of, my family is full of powerful women, and I went to women's schools for many, many years, I think 9 years all told. So I was sort of surrounded by, and most of them Catholic schools, so I was surrounded by very dynamic and radical nuns. And also just women who were very much interested in the life of the mind and the life of the artist, and I was really lucky in retrospect when I look at how I was raised and the ideas I was raised with. I was surrounded by powerful women and powerful examples, and they really made their way into, the characters are really amalgams of a lot of women I've known.
And I love the aspect of music, and it's how it is so transformative, and I think for Naomi, growing up in a very sheltered, she was from a very strict family who didn't allow her to do anything, but yet music sort of turned something on in her. So was music like that for you in your life? And because you really felt the music here, whether, she's singing and what she's getting from herself, whether an audience is singing, but also people, when they hear her sing, it does take you other places.
That's an interesting question. It really was for me. My family sings. Singing for me was, it was transformative, but it transported me. It just transported me out of myself. Once I could sing, and I couldn't for a long time, my voice changed as a teenager. Female voices change too, and all of a sudden I could attack notes that I couldn't before, and that was so exciting. And still to this day, I sing to myself. But I also, because I wasn't raised in poverty, had access to other arts. I danced and I, painted, and I had access to theater, but Naomi is poor and she's rural, and she would have music, but she wouldn't have access to anything else. When I was trying to decide, I knew I wanted her to be a performer, but what kind of performer? The only thing she would have access to is music.
And the thing is, she's such a complicated character.
Yes.
She's very needy.
She's kind of insatiable.
And like how you start, she is insatiable. And people are always there to bail her out, to be there
her.
to cover
That's
her,
right.
to take care of her, including her 10-year-old daughter.
Yes, especially.
You know?
Yeah.
And so that was the dynamic of that.
Yeah.
I mean, makes Sophia a different kind of girl, you know. And I was just amazing. How did you channel your 10-year-old self? Like you said, you never thought you would tell a story from a child's perspective.
I didn't even know how people did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you do that? Because she is so singular, this girl.
Well, there's a lot of me in her. The whole list keeping compulsion that she does is mine. I did that as a kid. I was terrified of surviving a nuclear attack. That's a long story, but I kept a list of things that would need to be invented once we survived, and I was like 30 before I realized not everybody was doing that. I thought we were all making lists. But there's also my niece who I spend a lot of time with, and her home life is unusual and maybe a little bit chaotic, and that brings out the adult in her.
Yeah.
All of the adults are very eccentric, and so that forces her to be this little tiny adult. Like, she would be 6 years old and she'd say to me, "What's the speed limit here?" And I'd be like, "It's 65. Are you driving 65? You know, she's like a little old woman because her life is sort of unmanageable in some ways, the world around her, and that children become adults. If they need to, they become adults very, very quickly.
Yeah. And I think it was part of the story and the relationship between Naomi and her daughter that was so frustrating. And you felt so bad. I mean, you feel bad for them both in a lot of ways because they're missing so much from each other.
They really are.
And that's was a really sad part of this. But I noticed the diversity of your characters in this book, because you have Rita, or Ricky, who is a transvestite, incredible character who lives with sister.
Right.
And people have to read the book because we don't have any spoilers, what happens with this nun who made such a difference for Naomi when she was a very young woman. But then you have Elizabeth, who is Sophia's best friend.
Yeah.
She's African American. Just everyone who creates this family around them. And then one of the main characters is Jim Piccolo.
Yeah.
And I thought he was just incredible.
Yeah,
So
I love
where did he come from? Because what he does in Naomi's life, and what especially he does for her daughter.
Yeah, I love Jim too.
Yeah.
Well, I discovered Jim's sort of external character doing research and stumbling upon Richard Nickel.
Right.
And it was his photographs, and I kept coming back to these photographs. They were so sort of clear and clean, his architectural photographs, and I kept returning to them. Finally, I was like, who is this guy? And I started looking into him and really fell in love with Richard Nickel. And his character sort of, I laid him on top of the Jim that I had already built. So it's not purely Richard Nickel's, obviously, but I took a lot of pieces of his life and put it together with the character that I had already. I think that whenever you have a sort of narcissistic, unpredictable, character, they attract caretakers.
Right.
And guardians, who are sort of dazzled by them, but understand the unpredictability and try to catch all the slack. And so that just tends to be, in my experience, a kind of coupling that happens often.
And I think for Jim, he loved them both. He was sort of the substitute father.
He absolutely does. And he's crazy about Sophia,
but the thing is, and as soon as you described his character and you're getting a little further in the book, I knew exactly who you had based him on. And we won't have any spoilers because we don't want to. We want to say what happens in the book, but basically, I already had foreshadowing. I knew what was going to happen based on the real Richard Nickel, and everything. Right. But he was such a great character.
He is great.
Yeah,
He's
really
great.
good.
Yeah.
So, and also his love of architecture, and the 60s was a time when a lot of great buildings were torn down. Were going down in Chicago. So much was happening. So, Sister, tell me, is she based on any of the nuns or anything that you had? You said you grew up in Catholic schools.
Yeah, there's a mixture of nuns and teachers. Yeah. I had some really wonderful teachers and nuns and lay people who were so singular the way Sister is, and could see sort of what you were and who you were, and were very committed to allowing it.
Right.
And she gives Naomi permission to be who she is. I had that, I took my sort of darkest, most complicated aspects of myself to these women, and they were like, this is how you were supposed to be. get out of my office, you know? And I was like, okay, you know, they weren't invested in shame or judgment. Yeah. They were interested in, you know, radical compassion. Like, I'm going to accept you as you are, whatever you are and whatever you're doing.
Yeah, which is so wonderful.
Yeah,
which is so. Yeah. And that's the other thing I loved about the book was so much as the talking about sexuality, you know, and you know, at that time in the 60s and the 50s, you know, LGBT, if you were any of those, were totally unacceptable. But there was a lot of acceptance in this book of that, which I thought was really, really
And that seems to be the difference when I talk to people, my friends, growing up gay in the 50s and 60s, many of them will name, there was that one person who said I was okay, and that's how I survived.
Right.
You know, and that's what the role that Sister I plays for a lot of the characters.
Right, right. So the aspect, you're a poet, and you've award-winning poetry, but also your music. How was that turning to writing? How is that different for you from the art of performing or of writing a poem and the lyrical sense of that? Was it very different when you sat down to write this book or previous writings? And how is the difference in the process when you're creating that kind of art?
It's so different. Writing songs and poems, they're like one-night stands. Can I say that?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
And, you know, whereas a novel is a marriage, it's a long, tumultuous marriage. And so the time that your life moves at a glacial pace when you're writing a novel. And it's not that way with poetry and songwriting. But honestly, you do walk into them from the same point for me with just this moment. How do I describe this person's, the way they're sitting, or this little feeling, the poem, the song, the book, you know, here's this kid going, I live in my mother's wings. You know, it's just this little moment. How do I expand that? But the novel obviously has to do a lot more work, and there's a lot more algebra, but they're similar in a lot of ways.
Right, because there were some just beautiful passages. So.
Good, I'm glad. Yeah.
And also, too, the aspect for me of the way you describe Naomi when she's on stage.
Yeah.
And what it does for her, and what it does for those who are listening. And I was wondering how that is. Were you writing as you, the performer, into her? Because so you really got a sense of what it was like for her to feel this, because she wants to be a famous singer.
You know, a lot of that I owe to, I was in a band, and there were 2 female leads. And the other woman, Ariane, is this incredibly sexy, dynamic, she's got this huge voice. She's so talented. And she was a performer wherever she went, and everybody just was magnetized to her, right? You know, the way I described Naomi. Yeah. And then she fell in love. And then she didn't need to perform anymore. And we had this conversation about it, because performing for her was a substitute for love and intimacy. I didn't experience performing that way. I loved to write music. I loved working with the band to make a song. I liked structure, making things work. The stage piece for me was, I never went into a gig like, ooh, I can't wait to do this. I didn't love it. But Ariane really got love from the crowd, you know, and because it was just one night or a couple of nights of gigs, it was never enough. And there was always this need for more. And so kind of my conversations with her about her experience of being a singer informed Naomi's sort of insatiability and trying to get something where she can't get it. She can't get intimacy and security from a crowd. Yeah. But she continues to think that she will be able to. She just needs a bigger crowd, and then she'll be happy. Yeah. But that's not going to do it either, as we will find out in the next book.
Oh, good. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay. So you know, the satisfaction you get from writing music or writing a poem or now writing, you know, longer pieces like this. Is there any difference, or is this been like ultimately the most satisfaction you've gotten from
I don't know. I mean, like I said, with the poetry and songwriting, you get a finished product. Yeah. You know, you can go into band practice in the middle of the night and have some scraps on a piece, like some chords and lyrics on a piece of paper, and you tell the band, you know, C, G, C, G. And by the end of the night, you've made a song that has never existed before, and that's incredibly satisfying. And the satisfaction from doing a novel is making yourself work every day has to do with discipline and commitment. And commitment, it's a long-term relationship. Commitment even when it's not working.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Sure.
There's a lot of that. So it's the satisfaction runs deeper writing long fiction because you really have to hang in there.
Yeah.
You know, that part is very satisfying.
Yeah. You know, outline, I always ask many authors whether you sat down and you outline, because you do go back and forth between her past and the present.
Outlined.
Well, no. I think it's really interesting when authors say they don't, because in a way, as you're writing, you're surprising us as much as you're surprising yourself.
Right, that's absolutely true. And I mean, I would say if you're a writer, you better outline, or you're a crazy person. But I mean, I just wrote, my first draft was like 500 pages or something, and then I had to try and find the story. So I outlined after I had 500 pages. I sort of went in and I got rid of, killed that person, got rid of them, got rid of them, you know, that character's repetitive, and honed it down to something that was more, that was tighter and cleaner. But it would have been lovely to have an outline and have known at the beginning the story I was trying to tell. I didn't know. So I just wrote everything I could think of.
Okay, okay. No, that's really cool. So, you know, your musical background, when was it that you decided that, you know, I think, you know, being a novelist is something I really want to try? When was that first recollection that you have of, gee, I think I want to be a writer?
Oh, that goes way back. I wrote my first book when I was 19. And I have written books through the years, but they weren't up to my standards. It took a long time to teach myself how to do it and how to do it sort of seamlessly. It just took me a long time, and it took a lot of maturity to kind of be able to see the work clearly. So yeah, I've been doing this a long time. Even when I was actively just doing music and on the road and performing, in my mind it was always like, okay, we need to get to the next city so I can get into a coffee shop and work on my novel. Yeah. And I fancied myself this like singer, closet writer, I don't know. Yeah. So yeah, I've been working on long fiction a long time.
Well, a lot of coffee shops in this book too. There are a few, you know, so it's really interesting. So the funny thing in reading this book, all of a sudden you mentioned Naperville.
Yes.
Our town.
I know. Did that surprise you?
It surprised me. What? Because you were thinking of 1965.
1965.
Naperville wasn't Naperville as it is today.
No, it was just starting to be
right. And some of those newer subdivisions and stuff. And I think this David, who she's with at this time, and out in and out relationship, but now is, you know, very much
going to move her to Naperville.
Move her out of the city to Naperville.
And have a normal life.
And have a normal life. David, and she's scared to death.
To try out a normal life with her.
Right.
Yeah. She does.
But I'm picturing that. I'm just thinking some new house in one of those earlier subdivisions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I thought that was so interesting that you put Naperville, that one little bit in there.
Yeah.
So, we mentioned the research on, what you might have done in Chicago's, but I was wondering, the jazzing and the music. Is there a favorite song that you've come away with besides the Boswell sisters?
Yeah, the Boswell sisters were a surprise to me. Yeah. That was part of my research. A lot of the other songs I was already familiar with. I'm trying to remember if Naomi sings Skylark. I think she does. Okay. I'd never sung Skylark. I didn't know the song, and I think that she sings that in the church. She has this moment where she's at the convent, and she's sort of trying to decide. She's at this turning point. What do I do? And she sings to herself, and I think she sings this song Skylark, and that was kind of a surprise to me. A lot of my friends who are musicians, they're like, oh, that song's been around forever. How did you miss it? It seems like everybody knows that. But I hadn't run across it, and it's beautiful. I love the tune, and that was a surprise to me. And the Boswell sisters were a surprise, and those were crazy.
And I noticed also too, you had such great descriptions, especially of the clothes that Naomi wears when she performs. Did you do any research on that? Because she even the one dress she wears in that performance the last night at the Blue Angel. But you have such great descriptions of the clothing. I mean, it was a very visual book in the way you're picturing people and what they're wearing. Yeah. So did you research some of that? What people might have been wearing, or what they would have performed in the '60s?
Well,
in that sort of setting.
Yeah, I did a ton of research, and I talked to people who work in costuming and people I had worked with in the theater, and asked a lot of questions. Part of my sort of obsession with it is having this very glamorous mother who wore heels my entire childhood, everywhere, all of the time, taking us to school. And the dresses And, she kept a lot of her dresses, and they were fascinating to me. The construction was fascinating to me, and it was just this very grown-up, sophisticated world. And all that went into it, certain dresses had specific undergarments, right? It's very complicated. It's a construction, and that's a theme throughout the whole book, is the construction of femininity and all the sort of work that goes into fashion the self that Naomi does.
Creating a persona.
Exactly. Yeah.
So this created a lot of nostalgia for me.
Oh, okay.
To that old club scene, just if you could just go back and be there. Yeah. And I know there's a lot of people who are cabaret singers that do clubs and stuff today. But did it create it for you, wanting to maybe just have a little time machine to go back and see some performers?
It did. I mean, and you can hear it in a lot of the recordings, and you can feel the scene, and it was a different world, and what a lot of folks are doing in terms of cabaret and kind of recreating that is lovely, and a lovely homage to it. Yeah. But I wish I could go back. I do, of course. Yeah.
But ever since finishing this book, and I finished it a number of months ago, but just having read it, and she has remained in my mind, Sophia, so much. I mean, she is just one of the, and you can compare with so many of those great, children narrators, from other well-known pieces of work. But what do you hope that readers will take away when they turn that last page? What do you hope?
What's my secret agenda?
Yeah.
What you said when we first started talking, which is family can look many different ways. And if we would open our hearts to the idea, especially if we feel disenfranchised or marginalized, and that's what everybody in this family has in common. They all feel marginalized in some way or disenfranchised in some way, or that they don't belong for whatever reason, because of sexuality, because of class, because of gender, because of the era they're born in. I mean, Jim feels like the world is changing around him and he won't have it, right? Yeah. So everybody, and we can make community out of that marginalization and decide how to love each other instead of letting the mainstream tell us how we should feel about each other. That's what I hope people take away.
Okay, absolutely, yeah. So what are you working on now? And you sort of intimated a little bit that there might be something else with these characters.
There is. I'm continuing the story. Okay. I had a sort of, there used to be 3 eras in the book for a long time, and I could never quite make the melody work of the 3 together, and so I took one out and just let it have the 2 eras, 50s, mid-50s, mid-60s, end of story. So there's a whole lot of story left. In fact, the story that I originally, when I really got into it, that I was aiming for, I never actually got to, Becky, because so much happened. Right. So there's still this other very large story that I want to tell that I'm going to set out to tell next. Great. Same characters with a few additions. And
okay, good. So we don't have to say goodbye.
We don't have to say goodbye.
Because that was hard. And I was wondering if that was hard for you. So you didn't have to say goodbye either.
No, there have been no goodbyes.
Okay, well, good. Yeah. So we can't wait for that. So, okay. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for talking with me. It's been a pleasure. And congratulations on this incredible debut.
Thank you so much.
The Last Night at the Blue Angel.
Thank you.
I know everyone will absolutely adore this.
Oh, I hope so. I hope so.
Thank you so much. Great conversation with Rebecca Rotert about her new book. It's a debut called The Last Night at the Blue Angel. You have to read this one. It'll make you rejoice and cry. Characters you will never forget.